They're super fine. And then I call. I don't know. It's not us, it's the kid.
That's all right. So, right?
Yeah, no,
So not sure.
I didn't really want to show the video, but
It ended up being shit.
That's totally, sounds good. All right, thank you for attending session 2, Digital Accessibility Fundamentals. The group here that we have from the EOT State Agency include Ashley Bloom on my far left. She's the Chief IT Accessibility Officer, specializing in oversight of accessibility policies, processes, standards, and strategies. We also have Adam on my right. He's the Accessibility Training Coordinator, specializing in accessibility training, multimedia accessibility, design reviews, and content reviews. And then last but not least, Melinda Minnie Johnson on my left, Documents and Communication Accessibility Coordinator. She specializes in document accessibility, email accessibility, social media accessibility, and content reviews. So I want to thank the group for coming today. We really appreciate it, and I'll give it off to you.
Thanks. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you for the intro. Once again, my name is Adam. I'm going to apologize initially for some of the intro recap that's about to happen, because in case we are having different folks in the audience, we want to make sure that we get that same baseline. So some of you just saw this information an hour and a half ago. We're going to do about 10 minutes of that, and then it's going to diverge into some other content that we did not go over in depth previously. So first off, if you are on Zoom and you've got questions, please feel free to throw those in the Q&A panel. We do have somebody monitoring that so that we can check on that as well. Or the chat. Oh, sorry, it's not a webinar. In the chat. All right. It's not chat. So, some expectations for today. So the purpose of these trainings is to gain awareness. It is not expected at the end of this hour that you will be able to implement all of these techniques. You may be surprised by what you learn. Don't be discouraged if you discover you've done something inaccessible in the past. That is why we are here, is to find out about that. So part 1 of this is going to be a recap for the folks who were just in the previous training. We're going to talk a little bit about what digital accessibility is, different types of disabilities, what is assistive technology, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, the Perceivable, Operable, Understandable, Robust Principles, or called POUR, and then Title II in brief. And then we're going to dive into some fundamentals about use of color, document and page structure, alt text for images, text, typography, and content, and time-based media, which is a fancy way of saying audio and video recording. So first, what is digital accessibility? Well, digital accessibility is about making sure that the digital world offers equal access to everyone in the way that we do in physical spaces. And it's making sure that our websites, apps, training materials, any of that content works with assistive technology. But most important, it is about the human element and empathy, because we have so many constituents and students that use assistive technology. Now, 4 main types of disability. We've got vision impairments like low vision, glaucoma, cataracts, blindness, or color blindness. And while color blindness isn't technically a disability, it is considered an inconvenience. As somebody who is colorblind, if you make something good for people who are colorblind, you are also increasing accessibility for people with low vision. Hearing impairments like hearing loss, tinnitus, or ringing of the ears, or deafness. Mobility impairments like arthritis, injury, stroke, paralysis, CP, or MS. And cognitive impairments like brain injury, intellectual or developmental disabilities, autism spectrum disorder, or ADHD, memory loss, and speech. And now some of these disabilities are visible and perceivable, and we can be aware of them. Some of them are invisible, and we might not know, and people might not tell us. So it's not safe to assume that we think a student or constituent or colleague does not have a disability. It is a large portion of us that have. And we had this question earlier, so show of hands for people. According to the CDC, what percentage of Massachusetts residents have a disability? Is it 13%? Any hands? 26%? Okay, or 31%? 26%, so 1 in 4. And again, as we said before, that it is this is people who are 18 plus who responded to the survey, who have a diagnosed disability and who have disclosed that disability. So we have to consider that it's at least 1 in 4 of our constituents. Now, these categories, disabilities fall into different categories of permanent disabilities, things that might be hereditary, come from injury or disease. Temporary disabilities like a broken limb, cataracts, surgery recovery, and then situational disabilities like I'm on a loud ride on the T and I turn on captions on my phone to be able to understand that video, or I've got sun glare on my phone and I use a dark mode or a high contrast mode, or I'm wearing gloves or a mask and now my touch sensor on my phone or my Face ID sensor doesn't work. So all this to say, at some point in our lives, and sometimes just on a daily basis, we will experience a disability that assistive technology can help us with. And as we age, we are more likely to experience other disabilities. So to help us out when we have a disability and want to interact with the digital world, we have what's called assistive technology, or sometimes referred to as AT. Now we've got some examples up on this slide here. Up at the top left, we've got a computer keyboard. We might not think about computer keyboards as things that are assistive technology, but if you can't use a mouse or you can't see the screen, it is how you interact with the computer. Next, we've got a young man of color using a screen reader on his phone. A screen reader announces the content on the phone, whether that's text, image descriptions, if there are any, buttons, links, and other interactive elements. At the top right, we've got Windows high contrast mode. This reduces the colors on the screen down to 5 to make sure that they are the highest contrast possible, which is very helpful for users with low vision. Below that, we've got zoom settings on a Mac. This allows you to zoom in on a specific area of the screen or the entire screen. On the right, we've got an interesting device called a sip and puff, and this allows people without use of their limbs to interact with the computer through a series of inhales, exhales. At the bottom left, we've got a refreshable Braille display. And this is something that if you've seen printed Braille on a sign or paper before, that this is a series of pins that raises and lowers based on what text is selected on the screen, and will provide that feedback via Braille. And as a note, combination of a refreshable Braille display and a keyboard is one of the only ways that someone who is in the deafblind community can interact with the computer at all. Down at the bottom center, we've got a man in a motorized wheelchair that is using a microphone for speech controls, and also has a switch on his cheek to be able to interact with the computer as well. And then at the bottom right, we've got a representation of eye tracking software. Eye tracking software uses a webcam or another higher precision camera to follow the movements of your eyes around your screen. And then you can use facial gestures like blinking or raising your eyebrows to do things like a click or a right click. Now, with all of this technology, how can we possibly make sure that we are making our content work with all of it? So enter in WCAG and the 4 principles. So WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, are a checklist of criteria that make sure that our content works with assistive technology. There are 3 levels of compliance in WCAG. They are levels A, AA, and AAA, A being the lowest, AAA being the highest. AA encompasses all of the level A information. So when we refer to AA, we're talking about A and AA. WCAG 2.1 AA is considered the letter of the law based on Title II and on state policies. It is currently in version 2.2, which is an update since this ruling came out, that mainly focuses on a few extra criteria for people who are web developers doing custom web development. If you're not doing that, then you probably won't need to worry about those extra criteria. If you are, it would be good to help future-proof things. So if you're an LMS admin or a CMS admin, or you custom build web pages, it would be good to check out those additional criteria. Now, WCAG is based on what's called the POUR principle. principles, sorry, of is it perceivable? So can your content be understood by multiple senses? Can I see it on the screen? Could I listen to it with a screen reader? Could I get the feedback with a braille display? And are there alternatives to time-based media? So if I've got a video, do I also have a transcript? So that if I'm somebody who can't process that information or parse it at the speed that it's at, that I have an alternative way to get to that content. Is it operable? Can it be accessed with the keyboard? Do I have to use a mouse? Does it require specific motor skills or speed? So for example, drag and drop, which is very common on the computer, is something that if I can't use a mouse is pretty difficult to do. There are ways to make it happen. It's a total pain. And so do I offer an alternative? And an example might be if you go to a website to upload a photo, you could drag and drop in that photo, or you can click the button that says upload from computer. And that way I'm providing an alternative for interaction where people who can't use a mouse can still perform that action. Is it understandable? Is my content clear and logical? Has the language of the content been identified? So this is an interesting one. We might have a document provided in another language. If you're working on a web page or you're working in a PDF, you can, or a Word document, you can identify and tell Word, this is in Spanish, this is in Portuguese, this is in Haitian Creole. And that will allow any assistive technology to translate that properly or pronounce it properly. And then robust. This one's specifically targeted at developers, but it's about if you followed web standards, if your coding is valid and your formatting is valid, and is it compatible with multiple browsers and AT? Or do you have a vendor that provided you with a website that only works in Chrome and doesn't work in Edge or Safari? So these things are what drive the WCAG principles or criteria. Now, for our new folks, what percentage of the web do you think is fully accessible? By show of hands, is it 4%? Is it 18%? Or is it 40%? It is 4%. So 96% of the web is not accessible, including major tech companies. So if you've seen email communications, documents, websites out on the web, and you say, that looks really cool, I want to use that and mimic it, it doesn't mean that it was designed accessibly or that it was executed accessibly. So it's important to realize that sometimes we will beg, borrow, and steal from other examples and patterns out on the web. It doesn't mean that it was done in an accessible manner. Even learning materials that you may find on different communities like the Moodle communities or the Canvas communities that provide different learning materials, it doesn't mean that they were built with accessibility in mind. So it's important to be aware of that. So now, why are we doing this now? Well, in 2024, Title II of the ADA final ruling came out. And that states in brief that public entities must ensure that web content and mobile apps that entity makes available directly through contract or licensing or other arrangements are accessible based on WCAG A and AA standards. Public entities with a total population of 50,000 or more must adhere to this by April 24th, 2026. So for us at the state, or at a school that serves the state population, we are in the timeline for April of 26. Clarification, if you have less than 50,000 that you're serving, like a K through 12 school that only serves a town of 20,000 people, then they have until April of 27. However, it's not based on the student body. It is something where a regional school would add populations together. An organization like a transportation organization that serves multiple municipalities would also add populations together. And generally higher ed is serving the state or a larger population and therefore has the April 26th date. Now, we know that this is a really aggressive timeline. As I said earlier, as accessibility professionals, we are very excited that this ruling exists and that it's going to make things better for people. None of us would have chosen this timeline. It came out in 2024, but as you may not have heard of it before, it takes 2 years at least to communicate to people that these things even exist, much less to get the work done. So this is a very big lift, and we are here to help, and we're going to talk about some of the different services that we've got to do that later. And before I dive into the actual fundamentals, I want to know if anybody's got any questions about Title II, about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, about this in general. Yes.
When you talked about understandable and you mentioned foreign language.
Mhm.
I thought foreign language wasn't considered a disability.
No, so sorry, let me clarify that. So one of the pieces of technology that folks use is called a screen reader, right? So if you're visually impaired, you can use a piece of software that'll tell you what's on the screen. When you're writing a document that might have multiple languages in it or in a different language, if you leave that set to your default setting in Word, and I get that as a Spanish speaker and it's in a document, when my screen reader starts doing it, it'll read it in Spanglish. It will not pronounce anything correctly because the language was identified as English. And in Word, there's a setting to say, nope, this document's in Spanish. And then the screen reader will pronounce it in Spanish with the correct accents. So English as this is not so much about like an English as a second language or a different language. This is more of making sure that if folks are using those materials with assistive technology, that it just reads it correctly for them. Yep. So let's talk a little bit about use of color. This one is near and dear to my heart because I am colorblind, and this is why I did so poorly in grade school social studies classes, because I could never match up legends with maps. Because I am red-green colorblind, which is the most common form of colorblindness, and unfortunately the most common set of colors to mean good and bad, go and stop. I would love it if we would switch to red and blue, because there is no red-blue colorblindness, but red and green it is for the whole world. So use of color, some things to consider. One, color contrast. So there is the idea of a color contrast ratio, which is determined by luminance, meaning the difference in brightness between your foreground and your background. Now, WCAG requires that we have a 4.5 to 1 minimum color contrast for text. We are not machines, so being able to identify this with the naked eye is really difficult. So we've got tools like the color contrast analyzer from TPGI. There is a web-based color contrast analyzer. We've got links to both of those that basically give you an eyedropper. You pick two colors on the screen and it tells you with a check mark if you pass or if you didn't. And this is all about making sure that our text is as legible as possible and that interactive elements are also legible, as well as data visualization. So we want to shoot for colors that have these good contrast ratios. Now, again, I said it's difficult to do this with the naked eye, and we're going to see why in just a moment, because we're going to try to guess. So I'm going to show a series of color circles with text over it, and I want you all to just shout out. Let's get rowdy. Nobody ever let me do that in class. I was a yell it out kid, not a raise my hand. So let's get rowdy. Tell me if you think it's a pass or a fail. So first, this yellow circle with 1 in white on it. Do you think that's passing or failing for color contrast?
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's kind of tough to read. It's failing, right?
Big fail.
There's big fail. Right now, if you are somebody who does not need corrective lenses and you look at text and you go, wow, that's kind of hard to read, then it's probably failing, right? So it's somewhat works here, but no, that's very hard to see. So failing. How about this medium blue circle with the word 2 on it?
Yes.
A little more question marks, right? All right, so this one is getting close. This one is passing, and it's just above passing. This is about a 5 to 1 ratio in our color contrast. How about this dark green circle with 3 in white on it? Got a couple of thumbs up, maybe, thumbs down. So this is right on the line. This is 4.5 to 1. This is our absolute minimum color contrast that we want to work with. Now, some of this might be affected by the fact that there's lights on in the room and we're on a projector, right? All of these are going to be probably a little bit lower than they would on a display or even on paper. But this one is passing. This is our absolute minimum. Now, how about this black 4 on this gray circle? Pass or fail?
Fail.
I love this one. Everybody says fail. This is passing. This is passing better than the blue and the green. Now, here's why this is funny. And this is a welcome to my world situation for people who are not colorblind. When you have multiple shades of the same color on the screen, it can throw off, particularly with shades of gray, it can throw off your perception of that color. And for something like, do I have a laser pointer on this? Oh, okay. I have a very dark gray background. I have a very subtly light gray at the bottom. I've got almost white, but not totally white, slightly gray text. I've got a gray circle, and then I've got black. And since I've got 5 shades of gray on this screen, your perception is that, nah, the gray is kind of wonky. But that is actually about a 7 to 1. So our 3 is 4, 5 to 1, 2 is 5 to 1, 4 is 7 to 1. And so it's interesting how we have a perception of that, even though it technically works. So this is part of why we want to make sure that we use a tool and not our eyes to guess this stuff, because we can have a perception that's incorrect. But also to note, if you put up a bunch of shades of gray and it looks weird, maybe don't do that, right? Not a great experience for anybody. How about this black 5 over this dark green? Fail. This is very dark. That is almost a 1-to-1 contrast ratio, even though they're different colors, it's real dark. And then our last one, how about this light red pinkish with a 6 on it?
Yeah.
I did this to trick you all. So this one is another interesting thing. So 4.5 to 1 is what we're shooting for. What?
Ew.
Ew. I love, that's a fantastic answer. This is a 3-to-1 contrast ratio, which means if my text is this size and this color, then it fits. But if my text is 18 points in bold or larger, then it passes. Now the U was my favorite response. And the reason why is that this still sucks, right? This does not look good. No one would say, yes, I love that color combination. Every once in a while, you'll run into something with branding, with logos, where there's like specific colors that get used. I don't know what the school colors here are. Mine in high school were like garnet and gray. It was real drab, dull stuff, right? So sometimes you'll have these kind of branding colors that make certain things a little bit tougher. If you're at 3-to-1 and you use large text, it is passing. I don't recommend it because right? So we don't want to shoot for this, but if we have to, for some reason like that, use a lower contrast ratio, we can make the text much larger and make it pass. Now, the second half of using color is using color alone. So we use color to identify things all the time. We use color in maps in a legend. We use color in data visualization, in charts, and graphs. We use color for stop and go. We have traffic lights that don't say stop and go. But the stop sign is a much better example. The stop sign is red. It is a specific shape that is used ubiquitously in this country as that, and it says stop on it. So up at the top where I have my do and don't, I'm using red and green, but I'm also using a symbol and I'm also using text. So now I have used color as a supplement for this, and now it is perceivable by a lot more people. And even folks who don't read English will probably look at the green check mark and go, yep, that one's okay. So this list where I have 6 items in this list, 3 that are in red, 3 that are in green, it's saying you must bring at least one of the following forms of identification in red and 2 of the forms in green. On the left, we're using color alone to identify these. Now, this is actually easier for me on this projector than it is on a display, but I specifically chose colors that are a very similar contrast ratio, and it's really hard for me to see the difference. Today on this projector, I can see it much more clearly because the shades are so different. But on the right, we've got it split where I'm still using color. I still have decent contrast with my background, but I have separated them into primary and secondary lists. So now I'm using color to supplement instead of color as the only way to do it. We've got a whole course on data viz if you do charts, graphs, maps, things like that, where you commonly use color to identify things and different strategies to work with that. And before we move on to the next section, does anybody have any questions about color contrast or use of color alone? Anything from the peanut gallery with the ooh comments?
No, it's just the red looks orange, which it kind of does.
Okay, fair. Hey, hey, did I mention I'm colorblind?
I did say that as a response.
Sweet. So let's talk about documents and page structure. So this is something that's appropriate if you're working with Word, PDF, if you're working in a learning management system, if you're working in a content management system, if you're building web pages from scratch. Our structure. So first off, I'm going to show a screenshot from Word. And in it, we've got some big text that says, this is a heading. My cursor is on that. This is a heading, but I did something wrong. Can anybody tell me from the screenshot what I did wrong? Any guesses on the step I missed?
You use the tool.
Yes. What tool?
There's a tool in Microsoft that it says heading 1, heading 2. It's
Yes.
It's prescribed.
Yes.
You're my favorite participant
So,
today.
hey, I didn't use styles. So what does that mean? Well, in any text editing software, you're going to have the ability to choose a heading 1 through 6, a normal or paragraph style, a list style. And here, all I did was make my font big and bold. So now why does this matter? Well, as a sighted person, I can see that my big bold font is a section on the page or maybe the title of my document. If I am using a tool called a screen reader for people with visual impairments, I don't get that feedback. It doesn't tell me big bold text. It doesn't say, you know, Aptos size 24, bold. Like I don't hear that. Now there are actually tools where you can turn that on, but nobody does that because it would change constantly and give you all this unimportant information. So we use headings. Now when I mark it as a heading, that allows me to know where the sections are in the document and listen to what they are. And so headings are available in, like I said, Word, PDF, any kind of content management system or learning management system that you can choose from paragraphs and headings and list styles. Lists are similar if you have a bulleted list or a numbered list. If you just type 1, if you see Word, when you type 1 period, it'll indent for you and it makes it a list formatting. That's good because it's become a list. But if you just had the number 1 and then the number 2 and it didn't do that indent, as a screen reader user, I won't hear that this is a list. I won't have the context. I can't navigate between the items that are in it. Whereas if I use that bulleted list, it'll say lists, 4 bullets, bullet 1 of 4. And then I can navigate through that list at my own pace. Now, from a heading perspective, headings are meant to be an outline. So just like you're writing an outline, each indent is a heading level. Your heading 1 is always going to be the top title of your page or your document. Microsoft Word has a title style. Doesn't work. That is left over from print exclusively. And this is the thing about documents. Documents in general, and I'm going to make an incendiary statement. And yes, we're going to talk about good ways to make Word accessible later. But the incendiary statement is documents are a deprecated format. We don't need them anymore because we've got the web. We still use them. And there are still times where they make sense, particularly if we're going to print or something. But Microsoft Word was created to be a print program. And so over the years, it has had Band-Aids applied to it to make it more accessible, but it has not evolved in the way that the web has. So if we have the ability to make a document in a format on a web page, whether that's in the learning management system or content management system, it will immediately be more accessible, take you less time to fix it. But headings, we want to make sure that we got headings regardless if it's a document or a web page, indents for each heading level. And we don't want to skip headings. We don't want to go from a 2 to a 4. Now, visual styles, they don't really matter. So if you don't like the way the Word formats a heading 2, you don't like the blue that it uses or that the heading 4 is italic, you can change the visual style on all of those headings. And we're going to see that later. But we still want to make sure that we're marking them as those headings so that it comes through to assist with technology that way. Now, before we jumped on to alt text, what questions do folks have about headings and paragraph formatting and list structure? That's pretty good coffee. I did not expect that. I just want you to know. I drink decaf. I know I'm a weirdo, and usually decaf is terrible, but that's really not bad.
Good decaf.
It's pretty good decaf. I'm impressed. Kudos to the cafeteria.
Yeah, the food too.
All right. Who knows what alt text is? Can anybody tell me?
It's a written description of what the image is, so that screen reader can describe what the image is that you're looking at.
Absolutely. It is a description of the image. If I don't know if that picked it up on the mic. So just, okay, great. Description of that image. Now, let's talk about some concepts for alt text. So alt text is often a judgment call because a picture can be used in many different ways for different intent. And so when we're literally describing a picture, that can be useful in some cases, but other times we might be using that picture for a different reason. So this is something that I would call a literal or functional alt text. This is a screenshot that I took in the mass.gov content management system to use in a tutorial to show someone how to insert an image and where to find the things I was talking about. So I've got a highlight around a section of the screen. My alt text for this would probably be the text editor in mass.gov with the insert image button in the toolbar highlighting. Right? Straightforward. I have all sorts of other text on this. There are other buttons. There's the context of it being in the section content. The purpose of my image was to talk about the insert image button. So my alt text talks about that. Now, alt text, I keep to 1 to 2 sentences maximum. Why do we do that? Well, if I'm using a screen reader and I'm going through text, I can do that at any speed that I want. I can have it read by character, by word, by line, by paragraph, by page. If I have a list, I can navigate through the different items in the list. If I have alt text, I get it all at once. And I can't choose the speed at which I get it. I can't go backwards and forwards. I can only get, here's the alt text for the image. And that's just the way the technology works and communicates with the image. So that being said, alt text, we want to be brief, 2 sentences or less, be descriptive, and remember what's the intent and figure out the intent. So here we've got one that's telling a story. And this is where it becomes a little more, even more subjective. So I've got a page for parental leave in Massachusetts. And on it, I have a picture that in this case, I might describe by a man of color with glasses smiles as he holds his baby up to his face. Now, this is a general thing to storytell about the parental leave. If this was a specific person that worked for the parental leave group, or was the governor, and I might talk about that and who the governor was, then I might have different alt text. Now, in this case, too, one of the things that's interesting about alt text that we want to remember is to be inclusive in our alt text. So it is awkward in society often to talk about race, gender, age, and being specific about those things. But when we use imagery, we often use diverse imagery so that we can connect with people of diverse backgrounds. It is important that we do that in our alt text and that we don't kind of whitewash all of our alt text. So we want to be inclusive and descriptive about things like age, sex, race, so that folks who can't see the picture can still identify with the people in the picture. Now, the last thing that we use a lot is decorative images. So a PowerPoint slide background, a border in your document, a different colored shapes at the top of a document just for funky effect. These would be what's called decorative. So in this case, I've got a screenshot from the MyMassGov login. And behind it, I put this faint illustration of a lighthouse that vaguely looks like it could be down the Cape. If I'm a screen reader user and I land on this page and I get illustration of a lighthouse that vaguely looks like it could be down the Cape, not great context, right? Like why? Why is that there? There's no purpose. It is just eye candy to fill up the space in the background. This would be something that we would mark as decorative. And when you're making something like a document in Office, when you go or Outlook, if you right click on an image and choose View Alt Text, there's a checkbox for mark as decorative. And that tells the screen reader to skip it. If you don't do that, it reads the file name. And we all know how helpful file names for images can be. So that is recommended. You do that, mark as decorative, or in Word, it's going to use that AI generated kind of looks like it might be a lighthouse. Give that a description automatically generated by AI. Not helpful. So we want to mark it as decorative or give it a description as we talked about before. And before we move on to the next segment, what questions do folks have about alt text? Okay.
How do you handle images that would require an entire paragraph or more of text? An example would be a PowerPoint slide in a class teaching radiography and illustrating the positioning required for a specific radiograph.
Great question. I would invite you to come specifically to our data visualization training. Radiographs are one that I am not super familiar with. I'm familiar with spectrogram. So if I were trying to describe that from, let's say, a frequency response, then I might look at the highest or lowest frequencies or what the point of that illustration is. And I would put that in the alt text. And I would say something like a key takeaway is that, 4,000 hertz has the highest peak descending to, this range. And give kind of an idea of what the graph is doing as a trend or a takeaway. And then provide the data as an alternative in a table for folks. So when you're doing data viz, you always need to have a combination of an alt text describing what the key takeaway is if possible. And if the key takeaway is that it's noise and that there's high peaks across the frequency spectrum, then that's something where that's the takeaway. It's a very noisy image.
So we have a clarification. It's not a data spread, it's a picture of bones or an animal in a specific position, not a graph, not data.
Okay. Well, if you've got picture of an animal or bones, wow, no one's ever asked me to describe bones in detail. There is a concept of what's called a long description. So let's say, so my alt text, a long description is a little separate and a little more in depth than we typically cover in our fundamentals. But normally what you would do with that is that you would have a brief description of X type of animal in Y type of location in Z type of state. And then you would make a note in the alt text of long description follows. Then you could either put a paragraph describing the image below it. You could put it in a collapsible element if you've got that in your content management where there's a long description button and so it hides it for people who don't want it, shows it to people who do. You could make a link that would go out to a longer description. But if the purpose is to understand the detail of what's going on there, then what the kind of things that you might talk about in class when you're presenting that image, that would be things that would go into that long description to accompany that. What other questions about alt text do we have? And I will also invite you, we're going to be sending out links to folks following these trainings to our office hours. If you want to bring specific image examples and things like that to us and say, hey, how could I possibly make this accessible? Then we can review those with you and go over that. Yeah.
I have giving my students that come in to help, because I'm a tutor, an outline of a chapter. And it's done actually in an outline form.
Okay.
You're basically not only using numbers, but also letters.
Yep.
And also there's some other stuff in there too, just like a typical outline.
Yep.
And some of them find it really easy because basically it puts everything that they may have. And I've noticed the same thing too, because the publishers will put something together. For example, one of my students is doing very well. And when I look online, in a particular chapter, they'll give me the notes basically from what a professor would normally use.
Mm-hmm.
And so I printed those out too. But that's not suitable for.
No, but if you can offer a print version of that, and I would also take the document that you typed it up in and put that into Blackboard or whatever LMS that you're using so that folks who want to get it digitally can get that Word document and get the outline. For something simple like an outline, if you make that in Word and you post that, that's probably pretty accessible. Word outlines, lists are not too bad. When you start making really complex things in Word, complex tables, trying to make an infographic, things like that, then we have to worry about some accessibility there. But if you're doing an outline, yeah, print it out, give it to folks, and also have the digital version available, and that way folks can get that if they can't see print. All right. Content and typography. So there's some things in here. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
One more about alt text.
Yeah.
There a preference, or is one better than the other between alt text versus just putting a caption on an image? So like if you have a presentation and you're already putting a caption on an image so that the whole class can see it, you also need to do an alt text for the screen reader, or is the captions?
So this is really a case-by-case basis. And so I'll try to give you a couple examples. One, let's say it's like a news report and there's a caption that's the style of the news report down at the bottom under a picture. In that case, the news report caption is usually giving context of the event or the happening that's going on. Then you would use the alt text there to be a little more literal in describing the image rather than the general caption that's there. So I would typically recommend that normally there would be both. However, one of the examples that I had previously of this idea of a tutorial screenshot. Let's say I had this image in a document, and then right next to it was that verbatim and a bunch of other information about it, and I was describing the steps to take. That's debatable. I could probably mark that as decorative because getting to the paragraph of information of what to do there is the right context, right? But I could also put this as alt text there and have that not included in my paragraph text. So it is going to be a little bit of a judgment call and what makes sense. But most of the time, if you're going to have a caption on it, having some kind of real short, literal description of the image in alt text is going to be your best bet. If it's going to be totally redundant and there's really nothing more that you could do there, don't make it redundant. So if it's redundant, then that's a decorative situation. Okay, content and typography. This one has a little mixed bag of things that are requirements and things that are best practices for usability and readability for people. And I'll try to make a point of those so that we know like, hey, this is something we got to do, and versus this is something that's recommended to make some of this easier. So first one, here's some requirements. We want to define abbreviations. So I talked about WCAG and POR earlier. Defining abbreviations before they are used in your content is very important. You want to define them at least once at the beginning of your content. Or if it's a really complex long document and you have tons of abbreviations, consider some sort of appendix or legend that would identify all the abbreviations used in your large piece of content. Now, for something like identifying this first from a cognitive perspective, super helpful. I moved to Massachusetts about 12 years ago, and I was looking for the DMV to get my license switched over, and there is no DMV here. So an RMV was something that was real common for everybody, and so abbreviations are not as ubiquitous as we think they are, even if we grow up with them. Now, the other thing is from a screen reader perspective, or from an, before I get there, from an industry perspective, RFI means one thing in one industry and means it's something completely different in another. So we don't want to assume that people know what abbreviations are. We always want to spell them out. From a visual impairment perspective, if I hit WCAG, W-C-A-G, my screen reader is going to is just going to say WCAG. If I don't know that that's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, not super helpful. And I will tell you a funny and not safe for work one. One of the most common things that you will find on websites are frequently asked questions, and it always says FAQ. Screen readers pronounce that as a word. So it says FAQ every time a screen reader user comes across FAQ on the web. So there are things where it can be very Very unexpected. That being said, again, super important for us to do this. If I come across poor and it says poor, it won't tell me it's an acronym or abbreviation. It'll just say poor, and I'll have no idea why that's there. Once I've heard that once, I can start to understand, all right, when this is used throughout, this is the reference. The other thing is, don't do what I'm doing here on this slide. We don't want to use images of text. This is unavoidable with logos. It's unavoidable somewhat on social media, right? If I'm putting text over a picture on Instagram, that's an image of text. We want to make sure that if we are doing that, that we accompany it with actual text in a post. And in a case like this, where I would have a bulleted list, again, for what we talked about, how I can't control how I read or listen to the alt text on an image, we don't want to ever have images of text that are a lot of text. Here are some recommendations. These are not a letter of the law. They are just recommendations that can be helpful. We want to avoid serif fonts for body text. I apologize. My serif font was taken away by the lack of that serif font being on this computer. The serif font means I got little hooks and curves and ligatures on the end of each character. Now, these are very popular in print because people with 20/20 vision can read serif fonts very quickly in print. However, for folks on displays, and particularly people who don't have perfect vision, sans serif fonts are better. All of the fonts on this slide are sans serif fonts. We want to avoid the use of all capitals when we can. So there are some legal requirements like legalese where there are things that are in capitals. In this case, if I have lowercase letters, I have a change in shape in my words. And this is very helpful for people with dyslexia, that they can see a difference between the words because there is a shape to the characters, whereas when I make it capitalized, that takes it away. Also, something to consider, if you have students with English as a second language and their language does not use the same characters that English uses, we essentially have a 50-letter alphabet, not a 26-letter alphabet. You think about the difference in the shape between a capital A and a lowercase a and how they are totally unrelated. Reading in capital letters can be very difficult. I had a friend who taught ESL in China, and he said that capital letters was something that really threw off students initially. So noting that if you have, if we can avoid all capital letters in passages, very helpful. Oh, sorry. I always yell at people to do that. Then I have a loud voice in here. I don't want to blow everybody out in the room. Again, a recommendation, there's no legal requirements on font size. We do recommend a 12 points in Word, 18 points in PowerPoint, 16 pixels on the web. This ensures there's enlargement tools that are available in all these applications, and this ensures that the smallest stuff gets to a reasonable size for folks that would be using Zoom tools. Again, not a hard, fast requirement, but try to shoot. Something that is a requirement around links. So links are almost always done incorrectly on the web. One of the most common things that we see are click here, learn more, read more. That is not descriptive. I don't know where I'm going. Now, if I am using a screen reader, I can pull up a list of links on the page. And if I have 5 click here's, that's not helpful. Second, let's say something like this Zoom link, right? The Zoom and Teams are a major culprit of crazy links that we send to people. If I am using a screen reader, I have to listen to every character. Yeah, it sucks. And not only is that just unpleasant, I still don't know what meeting I'm joining. And so this is something that always drives me nuts in like an Outlook calendar where you get some kind of Zoom invite and there's 4 giant links in there. And you don't really know which one to click on. And then it's like, okay, I think it's the, oh, join the meeting. There it is. If we do join the meeting, join the staff meeting, join the faculty meeting, join the accessibility webinar, and we use that text, that is super way more accessible. This can be done in every application that you use by typing out a phrase, highlight it, right click it, and then there will be add hyperlink. That works pretty much ubiquitously everywhere. Yeah.
Sound, and I'm not sure why.
Issues with sound.
Folks on Zoom cannot. I don't know whether it's you're standing on this side rather than that side.
Is Zoom not using the room microphone and it's using that one? Is this better? Hello, hello, check 1, 2. Can you hear me in the
Yes,
back?
it says much better.
Okay, so I'm guessing it is that ceiling mic over that one. All right, good to know. I just did some AV triage for whoever runs this room. Now, some things for best practices. When we can, use plain language and shoot for a 6th to 8th grade reading level. This helps out comprehension, helps out people with cognitive disabilities, helps out people with English as a second language. You might be teaching a course on science where that's impossible. That's fine. That's not what we're talking about. Just in general communications, if you can shoot for that, it's great. If it is not appropriate for the field that you are discussing, completely understood. Again, not a law, just a recommendation. Be careful of sensory language. Instead of see or hear, using words like view, review, explore, discover, find. This is particularly in communications and on the web. We don't want to call out senses that someone might not have, and we want to be more inclusive with that when we can. Again, not always appropriate in a lesson, just a recommendation when you can. The other is be careful of directional or visual language. This particular example might not be appropriate for you folks, but for saying something like, if somebody asks, hey, where do I find the syllabus on the site? And you say, well, it's the red button at the top right. Now we're describing a color and we're describing a position. If I can't see the color or I can't navigate by position like a screen reader user does, then I'm not going to find it. So we want to give a specific name. You could say it's the button that says, it's the button called syllabus. That's the big red button at the top right. Give it a name, make sure you're calling out what its label is, and then a position using that as supplementally. Now, the last thing that we're just going to touch on, because video is its whole animal, or its own animal, because it engages us visually, auditorily, and cognitively. Just a few requirements for video. So, number one, closed captions that we want to have on all videos. More importantly than closed captions, transcripts. And I say more importantly because a transcript is going to contain even more information than closed captions. So, for example, if I am a hearing impaired viewer of your video, I'm going to be able to see any on-screen text. I'm going to be able to see any kind of demonstration that you have. And I'm going to get the narration or whoever is speaking in the video via closed captions. So in the closed captions, I'm just going to focus on sound, talking, or if there was a specific sound effect that made sense for whatever the lesson is, or if there's a large portion where there's just music. Sometimes we're watching Netflix, you throw on the closed captions, you see, you know, somber music or happy music or whatever. Part of that is that, you know, sometimes in the entertainment industry, we want to create an emotion, right? We're trying to evoke that from somebody. That's very helpful. But also, if I'm watching a video for 30 seconds and there's no captions, I might just think there's no captions. And I might not know that, no, the captions are here, they're working, and there's just no speaking. So if you have a long segment, providing something like music in brackets is very helpful. Transcripts are going to contain anything that was audio as well as anything in the video. So let's say in the video, I have a title that comes up between a segment. Let's say we're talking about 3 different things in this video in the lesson, and I've got like a title card that comes up, but I don't say it out loud. Well, that wouldn't be in the captions because it's already visible on the screen, but it would go in the transcript. Now, let's say I'm doing a demonstration in a science class, and I am performing this experiment. And let's say it's something simple like a grade school experiment of pouring some vinegar and baking soda together, and we hear a bunch of students go, ooh, but we don't talk about the reaction that's happening, we just say, watch this. That is a situation where we would need what's called an audio description. And an audio description would be a voice that jumps in the video to say what's happening on the screen. You can avoid the need for this generally by being careful when you script the video and making sure that you're explaining what's going on in it. If you're explaining what's going on the screen, you probably won't need an audio description. If you've recorded a classroom live and they didn't describe something, then you might need to add that. So audio descriptions, transcripts, closed captions are required. AD is something that we only need when we need it, but it is quite possible that will be something needed. I've seen a lot of animated videos come out of different lessons, showing how machines work or showing how body systems work. If you have a narration talking about what's going on, then you probably don't need the audio description. But if you're just like, hey, watch how the circulatory system works, and then there's a minute of music and it just demonstrates the animation, that would be a candidate for audio description. ASL. ASL is, American Sign Language is something that is considered level AAA. So it is above and beyond generally what we have to do for the Title II compliance. That being said, if you have something that is sort of like critical to health and public safety, something where you're announcing, you're putting out a video on YouTube to say like, hey, we've had to close the school because there is a potential disease threat, something like that. That is a time where we would highly encourage you to consider including ASL if you can. When it comes to something like public health and safety that you're putting out, that may be an infrequent kind of thing at the school, but if you can, that's great. Or if you know that you have students with hearing impairments and you have large live events, to make sure that there is ASL or at the very least live captions available for folks. ASL, not a one-to-one to English, right? It is a different language from English, and people who grew up speaking ASL, that is their first language. So it is different than trying to read all the captions from me talking quickly to fit all this content into an hour. And the last thing is no flash animations, and I don't mean like Adobe Shockwave Flash old school animations, I mean no flickering. You've probably seen before something like, this program contains sequences of flashing lights. Viewer discretion is advised, right? So if they're a student and they have to watch this video for the course, they don't get to be viewer discretion, right? They could potentially read transcript. If your video is about chemical reactions or arc welding and there's a bunch of flashing, then that would be something where you would warn them and you would offer a transcript, right? But for the most part, we want to try to avoid that kind of content as it can cause epileptic seizures in photosensitive people. Now we have a whole course on video because there's so much about it that if you make video, you've got people that make video, have them join us for that. So as a recap, we follow the WCAG guidelines to create equal access to digital content, and Title II has set a compliance date for that for us of April 26th. We don't want to help support this, we don't want to use color alone for meeting, and we want to make sure that we're always meeting good contrast. That we want to use formatting tools for headings in our documents and web pages. That we want to provide alt text for images or mark them as decorative. And that videos will require captions, transcripts, and possibly audio descriptions when needed. Now we covered a lot of ground here. Oh, and text should be legible, clear, and when we can, written for a 6th to 8th grade reading level. Now we cover a lot of ground, and we do have other trainings. We're gonna have the word training later this afternoon. We've also got trainings on making PDFs, on making forms, on making videos. PowerPoint is incoming. So we encourage you to take advantage of those, to come join us for our office hours, our virtual office hours that we hold every other week. Those are a little bit thrown off by all of the upcoming holiday season, but please come join us in those, bring in your content, and we're happy to talk about it. Even if it's content I've never even thought of, like describing the position of bones. I don't know who's on the call, but thank you for that one. I will tell you that working for the state has been a very enlightening thing about what people might need for this. When I had gotten to the state, I had never thought of the concept of an accessible map. And then I said, I don't know how to do that. And so it became a larger discussion with a lot of people to try to figure out good solutions for something like that. So accessibility is a journey. It is not a one and done, and not all situations are going to be 100% cut and dry. There's definitely a lot of gray area. So if you've got questions or you're not sure what's appropriate for that, come drop in on us. We will discuss it. If we don't have an answer, we'll try to find you one. So I thank you all. And if you got any questions, please feel free to hit us with them. Is there?
Okay, I'm a tutor,
Mhm.
which is part of the Success Center for Library. And so we have something new that happened this past year, I think a little bit of last year too. So the student comes in and they are able to get into this program and they are able to schedule time with us.
Mhm.
And of course, once we've done that and we've had a session with them, then we are able to fill out a client report. And it goes to the center, but also to the student. So that's part of it, because we're doing a written piece of it. The other part of it is that if we have a resource, and that resource can be almost anything, a Word document, a PowerPoint, whatever it is, we can attach it and send that along too. I don't know how it ends up in their hand because I haven't seen that. I've only seen one situation where the student said, I didn't get it. So I was able to see their email address and then send that to them as an attachment. Again, this is another, you were looking at something there, which is, a piece of information in order to get someone into another document. Here we are again. And so this is almost something that is, we've adopted this because it's very efficient. I mean, it's efficient in the sense that a student can make that appointment not only for a day, but also the next week. And they are allotted, in any 30-minute slots. And usually all of us are available. With me, I'm available not only days, but also evenings. And that's going to be through Zoom. So this just opened up a whole nother.
Yes, giant can of worms, right? So a couple things to think about there. I want you to understand the difference in resources. If you made the resource or the school made the resource, then that is something that the school is responsible to update for accessibility. But if you said, hey, there's actually a really great article over here, and you send somebody a link to that article or to that video on YouTube, it is not your responsibility to fix that resource, right? Because you don't own that, that's somebody else. But if you made it, you put it together, or you paid someone, a vendor that makes learning materials to put it together for you, and that vendor is responsible to make that accessible. There is nothing wrong with sending out documents, PowerPoints, Word docs, PDFs to students. We do want to make sure that they are formatted properly for accessibility. You can totally keep doing that. You can email it. It could be through a different system. When they're scheduling that, I would be interested to find out if you've got students with disabilities on campus that either are keyboard only users because they can't use a mouse from a motor skill disability, or if there are visually impaired students that use a screen reader, to try to sign up and see if they can sign up for tutoring. So, for example, there are some things out there like Calendly, Microsoft Bookings. There's all sorts of different sign-up sheets available out there. Some of them work pretty good. Others sort of work, but are really confusing. And so I would recommend giving that a shot and being like, can I use the tab key to get through all the dates that I can pick? Or the arrow keys to pick times? And see, like, does that work? And if it's completely not a good thing, then you might have a student who can't sign up for that tutoring. And maybe they're embarrassed to talk about that. Or maybe they'll get frustrated and complain about it. So there's these processes that you have are great processes. And I love that you do that tutoring and that you have resources. I would encourage you to check out, can everybody sign up for that tutoring? So that's the way that we want to approach this, is like, am I making sure that all of my students can get to this? Or are there some students that I'm excluding by using this process? And if I am, at the very least in the short term, is there another way? Can they call this office and have somebody sign it for them? Or does the person who pick up the phone go, no, you got to do that online? So look, we want to make sure that our processes are accessible. We don't want to make two of a thing. So we don't want to be like, hey, here's the accessible version. You can do it this way. And also here's the inaccessible version that we give to everybody else. We don't want to do that. But we do, if you have a short-term fix where it's like, hey, we're going to try to find a good scheduling system. But for now, if you want to give a call to the office or send an email to the office to schedule, you can do that too.
One little advantage that we do have, and that is if a student walks in, we can make that schedule for them.
Right.
We have that ability. But it's just what happens once they leave us, and we've now used this client report to outline what it is that this session,
Is that client report handwritten or do you type it up?
we type it up, it's a cell that we have to fill in, and then also another cell for recommendations.
Okay, and is this in Word or is it in like Excel?
No, it's in, I believe it's like a, because obviously
It's on a web page?
right, it's within the program.
Okay,
So it's basically a cell which we are allowed to text.
gotcha.
Yeah.
So that's something, it would be interesting to know what, what does the student get? Do they get just an email with that information in it? If they do, it's probably pretty accessible. But if the system generates a PDF automatically and sends it out, it could be inaccessible. And if that's the case, then it's whoever makes that system, that's a conversation to have with that vendor. Yep, what else? Yes.
I got a really wonky one for you.
Okay, sweet. I love wonky questions.
We have MWCC staff who are in middle and high schools regularly working with first generation, low income students for college and career readiness.
Sweet.
Our staff are not on the high school, middle school platforms, if you will. They don't have the same type of learning management systems. We can't necessarily use Blackboard and just drop our content in there and enroll students in there because of the firewalls that are in place in our K-12 schools. So in lieu of our staff being able to hand out, hey, here's FAFSA, here's how you access the information, I'm a little at a loss as to like how to make sure that we're getting this accessible to those students.
That's a really interesting question. I love wonky questions, but this one is gonna make me think.
Yeah, I wonder, so. Do you mean you need a spot to put the resources that you're sharing?
That will be accessible to students, but they can't access like a web page because the schools have everything locked down.
So question, is this private or personal identifiable information, or is it just resources?
Resources.
Then I would encourage you to talk to somebody who manages the like school site.
Get
of
that site
content.
whitelisted.
Or do,
Easy, not as easy.
I know
as
it's
it
not,
sounds.
I know, I used to work in K-12, it's
Yeah.
not easy at all.
No.
It's- Me saying whitelist the site is easier than it, but
but not necessarily to put it on, don't put it in your LMS, put it on the CMS. Have a page on the Mount Wachusett site as opposed to the learning management system. So someplace that would be publicly accessible that doesn't require a login. The LMS, you have to like make accounts for the students and get them to log in. If you can do it on a public page and then that would be something that I would communicate with people at the school district about whitelisting it.
Know that that's content we can make publicly accessible.
That's why I was asking, is this private information or is this just research? Right.
But it is proprietary to the programs. In other words, if we put the information on a public website, everybody's gonna know how to do.
in like Google site. with the
I was gonna say,
section.
maybe talk to an IT member before I tell you to go rogue, but doing something like setting up a Google Classroom site, something that you can add students to that would be sort of agnostic to what tools that the school is using, might be a way to do that, or a Google Drive where you share an email link and say, hey, here's this stuff printed out, but I'm gonna share you a digital copy too, just in case. Yeah.
Just share it in Teams? K-12 doesn't have access to that. Thank you.
What else?
K-12 is a whole
Yep.
other can of worms, yeah.
Thanks for the wonky question, I appreciate it.
I do that regularly.
That's less specific accessibility, more technology workarounds, right? So. Anybody else online? All right, well, that brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you all for joining us. After lunch, we will be returning where Mindy is going to take us through showing you all how you've been using Microsoft Word, Ron, for the past 30 years. But in all seriousness, we'll be talking about Word after lunch.
You're gonna love me today.
And again, we're going to send out a recap email that's going to have links to a bunch of resources that we have. We have this presentation available as a page on mass.gov. And you can come join us for any of our trainings, sign up for our office hours and come talk to us. We would love to have you there. So thank you all for being here.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be a lot of. Every time you make something, will power everything.